All right, welcome back to another episode of Phoenix Edge. This is an RPG and gaming news podcast. My name is Hat.
And I'm Eric.
And I am Stan.
And today we are going to devote an entire episode to the Final Fantasy VII Remake. In the past, we're trying to change things up, but there's been so much news with the 7 Remake and different little tidbits that have come out over the holidays and just in the past week that we just want to cover as much as we can in regards to 7 Remake. Do some heavy speculation. So hopefully those of you Final Fantasy VII Remake fans out there enjoy this episode. So for this week, we are going to be talking about the new Square trademarks. There's the trademark for Ever Crisis and the First Soldier. So we're going to do some speculation on what that might mean and also comment on some of the fan speculation out there and give our feedback or our opinion on some of those other theories of what these trademarks actually are. Then Aerith's motion capture actress, she finished a scene with Sephiroth and it's got the internet ablaze. So we're going to talk about that and specifically her tweet in regards to the scene and do some speculation on that and also comment on what people are saying. And then Square-Enix, they're tweeting out some strange stuff these days. They tweeted a cloud inside of another cloud. And people are trying to figure out what that means. So we're gonna talk about it. And then there's a credible leak that suggests the PlayStation 5 version of the Final Fantasy VII Remake is coming to the PS5 in 2021. So we're going to talk about that, whether we think that's going to happen, maybe some of the things we might think could happen with the release on the PlayStation 5, a re-release. So those are the topics for today. Let's jump into our first topic here with these trademarks. So I said 2 trademarks. There was actually 3 trademarks that were filed by Square. The first one's not that exciting, but they trademarked the logo for the Shinra Electric Power Company. That's basically something I thought would have already been protected.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Are you sure it's not like a purchasing it over again, or?
Well, I don't know in regards to that, but I just think it's kind of strange that, who's going to start an electric power company called Shinra and it's going to use the exact same logo and why that would be a conflict of interest. Like, hey, now you're infringing on our customer base because you're selling electrical power.
Yeah.
Anyways, it's been trademarked, so that's good. So that's the first item. Not that exciting, but I'm sure we'll find out why that would be.
The entirety of the electric company.
Yeah.
It's like all of that is, but I guess Shinra itself is probably hard to.
Yeah. Well, he's
probably do the whole thing.
He's a man of many hats. So the next one is a more interesting trademark that was filed by Square, and it's the words Ever Crisis. Now, this clearly is Final Fantasy VII Remake related, especially when you start looking at the other trademark that was also filed at the same time. And some of the speculation around this, or some of the things fans are pointing out, is that the initials for Ever Crisis, EC, it follows a very similar formula that we've gotten with prior Final Fantasy VII games. So, and, extended media. So we have Advent Children, AC, Before Crisis, BC, Crisis Core, CC, Dirge of Cerberus, DC, and now we have Ever Crisis, EC. So is that a coincidence? I don't think so, but maybe. But some of the speculation is that this is going to be a remake of Crisis Core or some kind of shorthand version of Crisis Core since it's called Ever Crisis. And then other people think it's just a subtitle for Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2. Maybe it'll be Final Fantasy VII Remake Ever Crisis, or perhaps that might be for the 3rd version. And then we have possibly DLC that plays as Zack as an alternative protagonist. But in general, most of the theories surrounding Ever Crisis tend to deal with Zack in some sorts. I want to throw out there at this point, because I forgot to say it at the beginning of the episode, we're going to have spoilers for Final Fantasy VII in this episode. It's really hard for me to talk about this, or us to talk about this and not spoil Final Fantasy VII. Like the original
remake,
and the remake.
All of it.
Yeah, it's gonna both of them. We're gonna spoil.
Yeah. So to start things off here, like, what do you guys think about this fan speculation with Ever Crisis in particular? Do you think it's something completely different, or do you think that fans were pretty spot on with this?
One thing that's definitely true is that most Crisis material has been related to Zach or pre-events of FF7 in some way. Because we had before Crisis, that was the mobile game with the Turks,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think it's used more as like a template for the past. Most of it has happened to be Zach involved in some way. Um, uh, so if they're being consistent with naming conventions, I think it might be some kind of another spin-off thing. It's easy enough to call the FF7 Remake Part 2 type of deal, but
Right.
I know Nomura can't help himself, so maybe it could be the title for it. Or like Part 2 Nocte de Lubre, or I don't know. some Latin thing you can barely pronounce will be Part 2, but yeah, I think it's just more content for like pre FF7, or it could be a HD compilation of stuff, like maybe some form of Before Crisis.
Yeah, that'd
And
be
maybe
cool.
maybe Ever Crisis is like some play on that in some way. But
Yeah.
I don't know, it's pretty open what it could be.
Yeah. I mean, I think, just to comment real quick on what some other people have said, I think the idea of a remake of Crisis Core, I think that's really cool. I would really like a remake of Crisis Core, to be honest. I think that would be awesome. But I think that just like Final Fantasy VII Remake, if they were to do a 40-hour remake of Crisis Core, I think that they would just call it Crisis Core Remake. I don't think they would call it something else that people don't know. And the fact that they just trademarked it also tells me that it's probably a ways out, because I would have thought they would have done that, years in advance, right? So I put that in I would like that, but probably not. But I think that what this probably is, and this is going off on pure, off in the loony bin here, but if you look at the word ever in Ever Crisis, it implies the word forever or everlasting, which deals with time. And in the remake, Sephiroth is manipulating time, right? So I'm thinking that because he's able to manipulate time, he's able to escape death. And because he's merged with time itself, the question will be, how do we defeat a foe that cannot die? Thus, it's Ever Crisis. I could see them doing something like that, where they're playing on the words here with the kind of the time manipulation. So I think that maybe it could be a subtitle for Part 3, where they're really delving into some of the Sephiroth stuff, because I imagine by Part 3, the story is going to really diverge quite a bit. So
you see, I find your theory very interesting. There's one slight flaw to it, is that we're dealing with Nomura here, and I guarantee whatever crazy theory you come up with, he will out crazy you.
Well, that's the thing too. You never know with Nomura, but I guess I'm putting on my Nomura hat and thinking what would he might do, right? And I think that's possible. The other thing that I came up with was maybe this could just be an anime short series, kind of like Brotherhood, that tells the story of Zack, to kind of get people excited for Part 2.
Yeah, could be. I'm kind of in the camp that I think it's going to be a remake of Crisis Core, but it's going to kind of eject like Genesis out of the game. If we've speculated for a long time that the reason they can't remake the game is because of the the rights to that person who is like, his likeness is in the game, and it's a very key character that shows up constantly.
Well, key's a strong word. He's not really a key character.
Well, he's very important to the plot.
He is.
Of that game.
If we're keeping the compilation material intact, going through the remake, Genesis is a character
Yeah.
that happened, unfortunately, but did happen.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's easy enough to make him not look like Gact in next gen and have a different voice actor for him, so you don't have to deal with the Gact likeliness
Yeah.
or anything. But if you want to bring like old stuff back, like Crisis Core in particular, you can take the CG scene out of Dirge of Cerberus easy enough. But
Yeah.
I think Crisis Core is your only trouble with that. And if they remake it in some fashion or remaster it, I guess you could just get a different voice actor to play his scenes. And
Ever in there, which means like at any time or
Mhm.
kind of like always. So you could just do Crisis Core again, but just like write it differently so that Genesis is either absent or like far, far less important, and just go over the same beats of the story.
Why would they?
And it can be like a shorter version,
Okay.
like an abridged version of the game.
Because they're
And
making alterations to the story. That's why they would call it Ever Crisis.
yeah, because it's like an alternate history of what the events of Crisis Core basically.
They just
Leading
could just
up
call
to-
it Crisis Core Remake, right? And it's like,
They could, yeah.
keep going. I'm sorry, Stan. I'm interjecting with silly stuff.
No, it's okay. It's all good. But one thing that I think they probably will do, but going based on off their history,
Mhm.
is the company likes to reuse assets for sequels or DLC content of some kind, right? So I would think that any remake of Crisis Core, if it's Ever Crisis or if it's something called something else or it happens in the future, or whatever they choose to call like the Zack story to like get new players up to speed with his character, is probably going to use like the FF7 remake combat engine instead of what they used for Crisis Core, because obviously that is
Yeah, it's dated.
that gameplay is very dated. It was made for a portable system, so it was limited in what they could do with it. But moving forward, I would expect them to kind of use what they have, because that's been the company's philosophy. If you think about like Final Fantasy X-2, right, reuses a ton of assets from Final Fantasy X. Final Fantasy 13 had 2 sequels, and a lot of that is because they could reuse a lot of the assets they created. And then Final Fantasy 15, you have a big open world game, but right there they took out slices for character stories and sold them as DLC. So I would be shocked if like Final Fantasy VII Remake doesn't have some kind of added content for Zack specifically, like to get people up to speed.
Basically, maybe a 10-hour DLC, something along that lines.
Yeah, and you can put it because okay, so now I'm getting into the spoilers. So if this is the final warning, but
Well,
the
we've
ending
already
of Final yeah, I guess, yeah. Well, the ending of Final Fantasy VII Remake, like kind of time has there's a timeline in which Zack lives, right? So I would think that, and it could be Ever Crisis or it could just be called something else. I would think they would create some sort of scenario where you play as Zack through the events of the Midgar scenario. And then on top of that, they could add maybe flashback scenes to like fill you in on his backstory, his relationship with Sephiroth and Angeal and Genesis, if they want to put those characters in there, or they could just
See,
I think
that. Go ahead, Eric. I'm sorry.
I might go crazy with this and say that Zack still doesn't get involved with the main crew of the game, and I think the time ripple thing could possibly be a what if separate DLC, and you can call that Ever Crisis, and it can it can try to see what would happen if Zack did live, and how would the events like with Avalanche and Shinra, how would all that work out with Zack being alive? Because things could alter differently, like greatly, because Cloud may be in his weird comatose state, but Zack's there to be like slap him out of it, be like, hey, you're not me. He's like, oh yeah, I'm not a soldier, I'm just a soldier.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would change things a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we're kind of transitioning into the next part here, which is what would we want from the game itself, if that, or what would we want this, what do we want this to be? But to comment on this, because I'm not completely on board with this idea that, not that I don't want that, but I just, that sounds like a lot. And to even though they already have Midgar remade, I presume that Zach would go to different areas, and then they'd have to have cutscenes, and it's just, that's a lot. That's all. They'd have to change the battle system a little bit somehow. Maybe they could keep it the same, but I would imagine that you wouldn't have Zach that would go straight to Wall Market, dress as a chick, and then compete in the arena. And, they would have to change events. And I see them working on Final Fantasy 16 and 7 Remake Part 2. And they're trying to, release a PlayStation 5 version. So I guess I look at things to be a little bit smaller scale. What could be an incentive to buy the game on the PlayStation 5? And it would maybe be, just something a little bit extra.
Extra chapters included.
Or or like an extra quest line or something. I mean, they did include that ending with Zack for a reason. I presume it wasn't just made, and they have no idea what they're going to do with it. I hope not. I hope there was some kind of like sticky note somewhere with like their idea of, well, if people like this is what we're going to do. And so I don't know. I as a fan, I think it would be really cool if I could replay the game as Zack. I think that would just totally ruin the Cloud character, right? Because a lot of that is, him not really recognizing what's going on. He's have memory gaps and stuff like that. But it would be really cool to play it as Zack, and I think that I might like the game even more because it's a new adventure. But I think what I really want this to be, guys, and we can come back to the Zack, replaying the game as Zack, but I think what I think this might be, or what I want this to be anyways. So the cell phone game Before Crisis, it was a prequel to Crisis Core. I know you all know this. I'm saying this for people that are listening. There was a Final Fantasy VII game called Before Crisis, and it was a prequel to Crisis Core. And it came out in like the 2006, 2007 timeframe, and it was only on phones, but you can't currently play it anymore because it required a connection to a Square-Enix server, and Square shut that down a long time ago. So you can't really play it, but somebody remade the game in RPG Maker by watching somebody who recorded videos of them playing it and then copied like all the stuff and put it in RPG Maker, except it's an RPG Maker game, right? It has a story, but it's not exactly the same. And so I think that's really cool that that's out there. But Nomura has talked about how he would love to, he's talked several times about how he wants to remake that game, and he's been trying to get Square to do it. And they've never gone for it because it's a prequel to a prequel. So if they did, to tack on to Eric's idea, but be a little bit different here, if this was a collection, but it was Before Crisis and Crisis Core together, but Before Crisis was received like a kind of like a 3DS remake type deal, something that they could put out there to like a third party and have them do it, I would be really on board with that.
Here's what's surprising is it came on a flip phone in Japan.
Right.
It wasn't a smartphone game, it was a flip phone game. They remade Kingdom Hearts Coded. That was also a flip phone game. And they also did what was the other one? Final Fantasy IV After Years. That was originally a flip phone game also before they brought it to the Wii and everything else now. So if I had to guess, they could potentially make it like a handheld like game. I would imagine they would like HD texture it and put it on the mobile. But the thing is, I don't know if they would attempt to make it like a gacha game or something like that, or just put it on the store for a certain amount of money. Or
well, the original game is basically a 2D sprite-based game, so there's not. I mean, I think there's like a little FMV cutscene and stuff for like the opening of it and stuff, but it's pretty basic in its presentation. It, because it ran on a Nokia phone, flip phone, so there wasn't a lot of power to be used. So I do think that if they were to remake this, it would be a complete revisement, and they would probably change all sorts of things in the story, and we wouldn't know any better because I haven't played it. You know,
I would really like it if it got remade to the style of like The World Ends With You. If they were going to bring the 2D sprite style back, that would be pretty cool to bring into that HD field. Maybe put on the Switch, let it be on the consoles and PC also.
so that would be
um,
yeah. Because what if that came with Crisis Core, and they're both like in a collection on the Switch? Obviously, you would have to change the things that we talked about, but specifically the music and then the voice acting. I guess the appearance might be kind of an issue, but I mean, Square can figure something out. Maybe they can redo the sprites and it'll look a bit better because they redid the sprites in Final Fantasy VIII.
Yeah, you might be onto something because both of those games are the prequels, right? Like the Advent Children and Dirge of Cerberus come after the original game in the timeline, and both of the games that have Crisis in them, Before Crisis and Crisis Core, are the prequel games. So if this is ever Crisis and they continue with the same logic, which they might not, who knows, but that would imply that it is like some kind of telling of events beforehand, right? Like another prequel story. And so you could try to bundle both Crisis Core and the events of Before Crisis together. Perhaps the events of Before Crisis, like from Zach's perspective or something. You know, you can take the most important events from both games and just put them all together, you know, and then kind of exclude the less important aspects.
So
of
you're
both.
saying just make a new game with both events.
One game that has the most important.
And you really like this
events.
Remake.
Yeah, well, it might. It's wishful thinking on my part. Yeah,
I'm a fan. Why not? I'm a fan.
Yeah,
Square, you should do that. I'm a fan of that because, I think that there is good stuff. Even Crisis Core, we reviewed it on this on our channel, and there's some really good stuff in Crisis Core. There's also some really bad stuff in Crisis Core, and if they could remove the bad stuff and only keep the good stuff, but then replace the bad stuff with even better stuff.
And part of that, I think, is like the bad stuff in there is mostly filler or like unnecessary content. Like there doesn't need to be a chapter like in Junon in Crisis Core, for example, because like nothing of any consequence happens there. They just wanted to put you there and be like, remember Junon?
Well,
you know, so it's like you can cut out a lot of stuff and still get the same point across. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. We talked about this a little bit, but during the development of Crisis Core, they had a lot more story planned, and they ended up having to cut a whole lot during development because how much game would actually fit on the PSP game itself due to the limitations of being on PSP. And so they had whole sequences storyboarded out where they're going to spend a lot more time in Midgar with Cloud and Zack, and they're going to do all these different things. And they ended up having to make more cuts than they expected. And I think that, I'm just speculating here, it might have still been a bizarre game, even with all those story ideas in there. But I suspect that maybe some of the stuff in Junon, like maybe there would have been more to warrant being there, but they cut all the stuff out except the thing they thought looked cool, you know, fighting on the cannon and stuff like that, you know, which I guess was a simulator mission, but you get me.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think there's a lot they could cut probably from both of those. Although I have never played Before Crisis, so who knows? It could all be important. But
I've played 30 minutes of the RPG Maker version, and I mean, I give props to the person that made it. I still want to finish it, but I've seen video of the original game on YouTube, and it's faithfully remade, but it's not the same game. Like they just look different. I mean, they play differently, but it's got the same text, you know, the same story. So you can kind of get an idea, but it's in a presentation terms, it's just a different thing.
Yeah.
So it's cool that it's there, but what do you guys think about the fact that if they were going to release something like what we've said, either basically telling the story of Zack how would they prevent, or do you even think Square is even interested in preventing spoilers? Because if someone were to play just the remake part 1 and then they were going to go play Crisis Core, that would spoil significant. I would say most of the meaningful content in Final Fantasy VII would be pretty spoiled by playing Crisis Core. And I don't think, like, it's just presented in that game like you already know this stuff, so they don't hide it. They don't try to, beat around the bush. It's just pretty much thrown out there. I mean, there's still some stuff you can get from the main game that's not in Crisis Core, but Stan, what do you got?
Well, I think, to be brutally honest, I don't think it's a very big priority for them to not spoil certain twists of the original game. Because if you think about it, the way Sephiroth is presented in Remake has already kind of spoiled, if you will, not any specific event, but the way that he's introduced.
Yeah.
In the original. And also, there's like an optional cutscene that you can get in Remake where Aerith says like to Cloud, you can't fall in love with me, which is like a huge death flag. Right.
And here's the thing with this. I've seen so many videos of people discussing the 7 remake, just talking about their experience with the game. And there's always at least one person in these discussions that never played the original. And every single time that's happened, that person said, yeah, after beating the game, I went on Final Fantasy VII fandom and just read the story for Final Fantasy VII, right? And they're like, so I'm caught up. And it just drives me nuts because I think like, no, like that's not the way it was supposed to be presented. You read a Wikipedia article. It's not the same. But maybe it's been long enough. But I think I agree with you that I don't think Square cares. I think they made a conscious effort when they put Sephiroth in part 1, because I think they figured, okay, well, we're going to blow spoilers out the wazoo in this part 1, but we're going to introduce a new mystery with the Doctor Who Sephiroth, who, travels through time and space to screw with Cloud. And you don't know what's going on with that. So that'll be the new mystery.
Yeah, like they're not concerned with spoiling old plot twists from the original game because they've rushed them basically. They've
I mean, to be fair, part 1 didn't completely spoil it. I've seen a lot of people that never played the original, and some of the things that we see, like when Hojo says "You were never in Soldier" and stuff like that, it completely flies over their head. Like they don't even remember that scene because they don't have the context. But if you spend any amount of time talking, I'm sure that you'll pick up on this stuff, especially if you go Google the game afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, it hurts because Hojo doesn't even really acknowledge Cloud's existence at all until like to the part where Cloud hands the black materia to Sephiroth
in the original.
In the original, yeah.
All of a sudden, he cares, or like he knows about Cloud. He's like, I don't know, but
it's different.
It's gonna be really weird how that's gonna be set up from here because, like, is there going to be a Sephiroth they need to chase, or like, is it going to be the time changing one? And if it is a time changing one, why is he going to breadcrumb the crew through events that happened in the original FF7? Because that would ultimately lead to him getting defeated. So he would have to.
He has to do it differently. Yeah.
Unless he thinks that I'm going to let them do the exact same things because that way I know what they're going to do. And it's predictable.
I suppose. And then just find a different moment to kind of
and then he
throw
picks
them
a
off.
singular moment to screw with them. Because he's like, okay, I know that you're going to come here after Aerith, but I know I need to kill Aerith before she makes that prayer. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So that way she doesn't make that covenant with the planet.
Yeah,
she needs to Go ahead.
Well, I don't know how much Sephiroth knows, right? But if he knew that Tifa is the one who helps Cloud regain his memories in the life stream, then it would make more sense for him to kill Tifa instead. And then even though Aerith prays for Holy, he has it trapped at the Northern Crater at the end. That's why you have to go defeat him to free Holy. So if he's there with Holy trapped, even though Aerith prayed for it, but if Cloud is not himself, if he hasn't regained his true identity and isn't strong enough to go face him at the end, then he might just think he could win anyway. So if he killed Tifa
Why
instead,
don't you just kill Cloud now?
that's another good question. Yeah, like why didn't he go back to the events of Nibelheim and just finish the job? Right.
I guess he thinks that we need Cloud to get Aerith to certain events. Maybe he's done this 1,000 times and he's like, okay, I know it needs to go this way.
Yeah. Well, he needs them to get the black materia, I think, right?
Yeah,
because like
that's
the
imperative.
temple will close in on itself and become the materia.
Well, it's kind of like, dude, you can already travel through time. Why do you need the black materia now? Like, you're already this like immortal god.
Some people have said that maybe he can't travel through time, but he has like knowledge of the future events, like through the whispers somehow or something. You know, who knows? It gets messy.
But
the whispers are there to begin with because of Sephiroth.
Yeah, because he's like doing things he shouldn't do. He's like interfering. Yeah.
Right. And then also when Cloud fights Sephiroth and Cloud's like cutting trains in half and stuff and buildings in half. When they get to that kind of like desolate place, looks like almost in space, Cloud goes to do like the Omni Slash thing or whatever. And Sephiroth just pushes it away and he says, no, not this time or something like that. And so I don't know. I mean, I like to think that, I don't know, he's got some extra skills or some extra maturity, right, with his fighting, I guess. Maybe it's just because he knew it was coming that it didn't impact him. And plus Cloud's not as good at that point either, so. Yeah.
He seemed like he was good enough at the final boss of that game. Jeesh.
Yeah, we defeated a god. But we can't defeat the Midgar Zolom.
We'll see how that goes, yeah.
If only a Midgar Zolom had protected the timeline.
Yeah, going back to the question about like, are they concerned about spoilers? Right. You know, I guess even if Ever Crisis is like some sort of prequel story or, you know, a remake of Crisis Core before Crisis, whatever, something that might spoil events.
Right.
They've only trademarked it here, which means they could just finish the FF7 remake project, however many parts it's going to be first, and then go back to the prequel stuff that they want to clean up or make better.
I agree. That's kind of where I was going to go, was that I thought that the easiest solution to this would be to just wait until part 3 is released, or at least however long in the process where it takes to get to a lot of these spoilers.
Yeah, mm-hmm.
It seems such like a big mess to mesh all this stuff together. And just like hearing through it, it's like I'm thinking in my head, like would it work with this if we did this? And like everything just seems like a major mess.
It's almost like, why didn't you just start here in the first place? Right?
Yeah. They probably need to get through all the remake parts, like craziness, and put a nice little bow on that so that makes as much sense as possible when they're finally done with it, and then go back and see how they want to retell like the prequel events.
They probably did this, and now they're all like, oh, all right, everyone. So we decided to not make this a remake. So how can we make this have any resemble of sense from here on out? It's like, you can't. I'm like, okay, well, write it anyways.
Yeah.
Well, according to Katase, he said, please expect it to remain the same story from here on out. And I'm like, well, you kind of said that 8 months before the game came out also, I think. So we'll have to see. But we can keep talking about Ever Crisis, but this is also going to tie into that. Square trademarked another name, the First Soldier. And in lore, as some of you probably know, Sephiroth was the very first soldier. He's the inspiration for the entire soldier program. And so this clearly is pointing to Sephiroth. So the current speculation is this could be the subtitle for Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2 or Part 3. Basically, whenever they start exploring the past of the Nibelheim incident and Aerith's past and just the Genova cells and all that stuff, this will be the First Soldier. or this could be a Final Fantasy novel based on Sephiroth called The First Soldier, or some DLC focusing on Sephiroth, or again, an anime or something like that. But what do you guys think about that?
I think it's a bad idea. I think one of the appealing things about Sephiroth is there's a lot of mystery to his past, and that's what makes.
So you
him
think
very,
this would be some kind of back history of Sephiroth then? I guess it's called First Soldier.
Maybe, like, I think it would go over like how he was born, like with Professor Gas project, and like with Hojo and Lucretia having a child with him, and maybe able to explore his teenage years, I would guess. Because how old is Sephiroth? Like
this is a very odd question, because I feel like a Final Fantasy VII new, because I don't know the official age of Sephiroth, because I know the experiments were only like 5 years, right? But I think he's older than that.
He is 27.
He's supposed to be 27, but is that his physical age, or is that his mental age?
No, is he 27 FF7 or in Crisis Core?
In the original. Oh, well, that's hard to know, yeah, because he's been dead prior to the events of FF7, basically. Like, he, for all intents and purposes, he basically died and then ended up at the Northern Crater. So who's to say how old he is by that point?
Let's just say, for argument's sake, he's in his
mid-20s.
Mid-20s. Which is weird if you add it up, because didn't Vincent die 30 years ago? The Hojo?
I don't have the time. I know that's what happened, but I don't know how long it's been.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Maybe 25 or so years ago. How about that?
I could have swore it was not that long. I'm going to Google this while you're talking.
And I would guess it's him when he if it's a game or an anime or anything. Well, if it's a game, it'll obviously be like his teenage years. But from the sound of it, I don't think they're going to make a whole game that way. I think it's either going to be like some kind of anime special, or some like special 3D movie or something. I don't think they are going to make so many games for this compilation.
Yeah, I'm that's kind of where I lean as well. I would want to see like maybe a 4 to 8 anime episode series, kind of like how they did with the Final Fantasy 15 Brotherhood, to give you more backstory on those characters and kind of what they were like when they were younger. Just kind of do the same thing, because if you make a game based on Sephiroth, well, I'm sure the whole appeal is like, oh, it would be cool, right? That's the that's the whole point of making it a game, is everybody wants to play as Sephiroth and be a badass. But like his he becomes the villain, so then it's kind of, I don't know, not a big fan of like although I guess he's not villainous in his early years. He would be more like trying to be a good soldier and such, But
real quick, chime in and then we can go back to this to clarify the age deal, just because I know someone's going to type this in the comments. Yeah. So what I was referring to, and I Googled this and I was semi-correct. So Sephiroth was 25 and at the events, roughly 25, the 27 at the events of Final Fantasy VII, but or the Nibelheim incident anyways. And then he was basically destroyed after that. And then his body was rebuilt. So technically in Final Fantasy VII, he's 5 years old, but his body's 5 years old. His mind is not 5 years old. He's
right
in his 30s, if that makes sense. So just to clarify that, so someone's not losing their mind, but continue.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I would prefer like a kind of an anime, like a anime miniseries, for if it's going to focus on Sephiroth, because you have a lot of drama for between like Hojo and Gast and Vincent and Lucretia that is like probably better off portrayed as more of like a passive entertainment, like something you view, something you watch. Because if you create a game and it has Sephiroth, well, now you have to create all kinds of scenarios in which Sephiroth gets to go slice people up, and outside of like Wu Tai and then the Nibelheim incident, which you definitely don't want to have the player's perspective, like, guiding Sephiroth's actions during that part. You might be able to get away with it during the Wu Tai war, but you'll just have to invent a bunch of missions that Sephiroth had to take early in his career. And that's kind of what bogged down Crisis Core as well. There's just like a bunch of scenarios that they had to invent for Zack, and inevitably Genesis like showed up every time, or his clones showed up every time, and it like was just really dragged out and like played out. So for that reason, I'd rather see like that kind of drama of him becoming the first soldier like play out as an anime. I think that would be better.
I think that would be cool too. I don't know if that's what they're going to do. Obviously, none of us know, but I think that would be really cool. I for some reason I'm strangely interested in this idea. I know this is me being a fan. This isn't what I think Square would actually do, but I mean, I wouldn't mind a 40-hour RPG with Sephiroth. I think that would be awesome. I would love it. Him becoming a soldier, and then it just ends with him at the Nibelheim incident or something like that. I mean, even if they just merged it with Zack's story and it was just basically the history of Soldier and it kind of transferred back and forth between playing as Sephiroth and Zack, I think that would be really cool. But I don't think that's what Square's doing, but I like the idea of it.
I still hope they don't.
I understand it kills the mystery, but dude, I beat the game 25 years ago or something like that. Like,
right. Well,
I'm way past that. Even
if they did, I just don't know how they would keep it interesting, because you have Sephiroth, who they have to is like the alpha, right? He's like at the top, like he's the man.
But it's going to be,
and then
it's going to be, he's not going to start off as the man.
Right. But like it kind of, the whole point of playing as Sephiroth, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's really appealing to play like a Sephiroth where he goes like from weak to strong when he's only ever been portrayed as like super, super strong.
Well,
I think that would be enjoyable.
Sephiroth also, from the date of his birth, he has been an experiment by Hojo by injecting Genova cells. Like from day one, like Sephiroth has been built up and raised to be like this super soldier. So if they do an origin story of him, it's obviously going like he's been raised on the battlefield essentially.
Yeah, he has to be exceptional in like almost every way. That was kind of the whole point.
Well, I mean, but Cloud wasn't a real soldier, but Zack was supposed to be a soldier too, and he was supposed to be an exceptional warrior. I mean, how many people don't even make it in the soldier, and he started off at second class? Obviously, that's not going to be the same as Sephiroth, who's supposed to be the best. But I mean, I think that players have to understand that you can't start off with a level 100 character and just like that's going to be the entire game. It has to be a game. There has to be growth. I mean, when I played Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, Goku wasn't like a Super Saiyan at the beginning. There's a narrative focus on like the story of getting stronger. We all know Goku's a badass, but I want to see it happen. I want to see that transition. I know that he was born and genetically made to be this great warrior, but I mean, he's got to learn how to fight somewhere, right? And perhaps, they could incorporate the experiments into somehow of his skill tree or whatever. I mean, they did a DLC for Final Fantasy 15 episode Arden, and it was pretty cool. I really enjoyed it. I really liked that. And they did have him being a badass for half the DLC. And it was just Arden running through a city and just you killing as many people as you can. And it was strangely fun because the more people you killed, the more powerful he got. And there was kind of a game loop with that. And, there's different ways they could approach it. But I think most people would understand that this is a game. And because it's a game, you're not going to have Sephiroth, maxed out in his stats at the beginning of the game. You're trying to tell a compelling story.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I just don't. because
they had Cloud cut a building in half. I don't think they're that worried about it.
right, yeah, the like being consistent with the power levels, yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm just kind of concerned that even if they did and took that approach that you're talking about with like a traditional RPG with a story where you level up and gain skills and everything,
Sure.
I mean, that could be fun. But then from a story perspective, they're going to have to invent things in the FF7 universe that are credible threats to like give Sephiroth a game over.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And that's kind of like they had to do that for Crisis Core as well. And I think they only succeeded like with like minimum success for that because they had.
Sorry,
they essentially had to. The events of FF7 dictate that Zack can't win and defeat Sephiroth, obviously. So they have to tell the story differently and insert this Genesis character as the new villain so that at the end of the game, Zack can defeat Genesis, right? And then it's like he still had like a major victory in his like
right. It has to be a
character arc.
Yeah.
So they're going to have, if they did that, they would have to invent a character that for Sephiroth to defeat by the end of his game, or several characters for him to overcome. And they just haven't had a good track record of adding to the FF7 universe in that way.
Well, let me respond to this real quick, and because it was my initial suggestion. I think that they could take this idea and they could make it work because they do make Superman games, right? And Superman is all powerful. So there's ways that you narratively can make it compelling. Maybe Sephiroth doesn't have to beat a single enemy. Maybe he has to beat a nation, and not by himself, but there's a compelling reason to do it, and maybe there's some kind of internal struggle. They can jump into the manipulation that Shinra is doing to Sephiroth to make him join Soldier, because when Sephiroth does realize what they did to him, he feels betrayed. He feels like you didn't tell me this. I did all these things in your name. He feels betrayed, like he was used. And that came from somewhere. Clearly he felt like, okay, you lied about this. What else have you been lying about? And so I think there's a lot they could do with that. I agree with you. They would probably just take the easy route and, make him defeat like a giant tree monster at the end or something. Right. Or maybe the Midgar Zolom. That's the moment, and he's just been internally stuck on a tree.
Justify a reason for him to die. I mean, we got games like Devil May Cry where Dante is essentially invincible to like 95% of the things that come at him. And, when you play the actual game, it's really hard to play and you die all the time. I mean, you don't necessarily need to give a story reason why Sephiroth may die in the game. It's just how a gameplay mechanic goes.
Yeah.
And I think people accept that all the time. So I don't think that would be a big issue at all. If you just gave Sephiroth the life bar and he died, because that's not supposed to happen. Like when you play
how the story goes.
It's kind of like Zelda, where they have 3 timelines, and there's one where Link dies sometime during the game, and Ganon wins. They do go a little crazy sometimes, but in most occasions, it's just it's just a means to be a game.
Yeah, I do. As an olive branch, I'll agree with you a little bit, Stan, and say that it would be an odd way to end the game for one of the most menacing villains to have your villain defeated by Cloud, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, that would be kind of anticlimactic, but maybe they could incorporate some kind of extra narrative beat in there that would make it seem like, Sephiroth lost something aside from a reunion with his mother, because as cool as Sephiroth is, once he goes evil, he becomes very manipulative, but also he becomes very like one note. I don't want to say one note, but he just wants to kill everyone.
He has a massive superiority, like godlike, complex to him, and
he needs to go to a therapist.
He legitimately believes that he is a god amongst the people under him, and it's up to him to judge happens to them. So
So-
that, I mean, so
If they
that's
could
why it's like that. 'Cause
further
he-
embellish that, I think that would be cool to add something else in addition to him just trying to take over the planet.
Yeah, because if you play Crisis Core, he's not like that at all. He's he's definitely more to himself in the game, and like he's more introvert. Like he goes out and does his mission. He doesn't normally buddy with people unless it's like possibly NGO or Genesis. He warms up to Zach a little bit, but like he's not like an overall like social person or anything. So you would probably have to work that kind of personality into an even younger form of him, because you have to think too that his whole life he's been
The
like
best.
a soldier.
Yeah.
So like he's not really made many opportunities to make friends. So you
Well,
kind of have
remember he sent Zach on that mission because he didn't want to have to kill Angeal,
Mhm.
because he was a friend with him. So I do agree with you, Eric, that it's difficult for him. Obviously, his only friends were in the military, so that makes a lot of sense too. So
Yeah. He in Crisis Core, he's definitely portrayed a little differently in that he's more quiet, like you said, and kind of, but he has difficulty connecting to people because he's the best, right? Like he doesn't have anybody on his level. But then in FF7, when the Nibelheim incident happens, he kind of leans full into kind of his narcissistic tendencies. He finds out he was an experiment. He doesn't accept it. Then he goes down to research, research the what's going on with Shinra, and he finds some incorrect research down there that suggests that he could be one of the ancients, that Genova was one of the ancients, and if Genova is his mother, that makes him one of the ancients as well. And he just accepts that because it's already kind of confirming, like, oh, I am special after all, and then he believes that and commits that atrocity at Nibelheim. So
this is a massive tangent, but I think people enjoy it. Do you think Shinra made the right decision and not telling him this, or do you think there was a way they could have told him this and not had that result? Do you think it was an inherent character flaw, or do you think there was a way that he could have been told where that wouldn't have happened?
they would have had to tell him a lot earlier when he was
Like
younger.
when he was like 5. Yeah.
Yeah, or like maybe in his early teens. Yeah, that like, hey, actually,
So that superiority
creative
complex wasn't.
would kind of disappear. But by the time he's already in his 20s, he's like fully developed, mentally. And so when confronted with the idea that he's an experiment, right, he went down to the Shinra research and found the research
What
that
if
would
they had told
confirm
him
his
a year
greatness
earlier,
to him.
but somebody just told him? Like Angeal sat down and was like, "Hey, man, I found this. It's impacting me too. Let's talk." Well, I guess that knowledge was so damaging that it made Genesis leave too.
Yeah,
I don't know. I
Well,
find
I
this
don't know.
stuff fascinating.
just remember also Hojo keeps to himself also, and he doesn't really share his own information.
Yeah.
Like even like during the scene where Hojo's explaining like his scientific theories, and Rufus goes to him and he's like, how come I've never been reported on any of this stuff? And he's like, and Hojo's like, well, because I don't have reports to give. It's like, it's all in my head.
Yeah,
Well, and
he keeps his secrets. Yeah.
And he laughs too, right? Like he does like a slight little chuckle, his typical hand up to his mouth, and he like moves his head really fast. And then he just says, "Oh, it's all up here." So he's just, he's on his own program.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think another character that would be heavily involved if there was a Sephiroth story would be Professor Gast. He a lot of times Sephiroth praises the hell out of Professor Gast and goes out of his way to insult Hojo. He thinks Hojo was just like a second-rate scientist, while he was the one who actually like properly started the whole Genova project.
Yeah, that would be really cool. See, that's what I'm talking about. There's all these characters that are referenced in Final Fantasy VII that we don't get a lot of information on. Aerith's mom in particular, I think it would be really cool if we could get some more information with her. You know, some more of the Turks for sure. So,
Yeah,
Could
I
get
mean,
a little more insight on Vincent.
Vincent as well. Yeah, that's a good point. So, you know, I think there's a lot of good stuff there. I think some of the apprehension from us on to not do this is because Square's side Final Fantasy VII games, not including the remake, talking about like Dirge of Cerberus, is not very good. So the idea of them doing this well is
At the same time, I didn't want them to go this direction with the remake either, but you know, now they have. Now it's just speculation on like what can be done to make it work. It'll be the same thing with this. I don't want a Sephiroth movie or game or anime, but if it has to happen, then we hope it happens this way.
They could do it right, or by right I mean like what we want to see out of it. You know, they have an opportunity to make it good. Will they though? It's kind of hard to tell. I remember when the Final Fantasy VII compilation first came out, like there was a period, probably, you know, the first couple years that it was coming out where I was hyped for it, you know. Like I liked Advent Children the first time I saw it. I enjoyed Crisis Core the first time I played it. It's revisiting them now that it's like, oh, you see all the cracks, you see like compared to the original game how certain things don't hold up so well.
yeah.
And so just like time is a harsh, I think the quote says like time is the most harsh but the most fair judge of things, you know. And just over time Final Fantasy VII has kind of like stayed where it was, but everything else is like not quite like how much it was appreciated back then is like has kind of dropped. It's kind of gone down.
Because I just can imagine a Sephiroth game and they would just be worried about dumb stuff. I could see Nojima saying, well, we all know him as Sephiroth and that's very menacing, but we want to find a way to humanize the character. So they would have some character like Riku that calls him Sephi or something like that through half the game. And like they would do dumb stuff like that. And it would drive me. I could see them this just going completely off the rails too. So
yeah, it could. Yeah.
The flashback scene already does a good enough job humanizing him. Like it lets you know that he was a normal person or the hero that, you know, people aspired him to be before he descended to madness. It's, you know, do you really need that much more information?
yes.
Like, do you need even more context on the kind of person Sephiroth was? I think if anything, it could ruin the character if you dive too much into his story.
Well, this is where I go back to, it's not that our apprehension is not because it's not a good idea. It's that if this goes wrong, this could be really bad.
Yeah. Maybe a good comparison is like Darth Vader, right? And Star Wars. And then people loved Darth Vader. And so like they thought, okay, it'd be cool to go tell the story of how he became that character. Yeah, but then that's while it has its good moments, it's full of so much stuff that you're like, I don't see the character the same way anymore.
You're looking at a guy with like a black plastic helmet on that breathes really loudly. What were you expecting? I'm just kidding. I'm being facetious. I don't know. It's just, I'm good at compartmentalizing this stuff. So when I see something like the prequel Star Wars movies, I just think to myself, that's not canon. And I don't think of, when I rewatch the movies, I don't think of them as canon. I just compartmentalize that as, I'm not thinking about that crap. So
I think that is an excellent comparison though to
it's perfect.
Darth Vader.
Basically what could go wrong. Yeah.
I mean, everyone had their own imagination of what Darth Vader was like before, based off information we were given. Like, he was a great pilot. He was a good friend to Obi-Wan Kenobi. So we already know that there was a point in time where Darth Vader was a good person, but events led him to turn to the dark side. And I guess maybe it's interesting to see how he turns to the dark side in some aspect, but it goes to show where, like, if you give too much information, that like it ruins that kind of imagination or mystery to the character that people have had since 1997 with Sephiroth.
Yeah. Yeah, you never know if what you present is going to be better than what people filled the blanks in, right, in their own mind.
Yeah, but you guys are approaching this from a sense of fear that you'll mess it up. But there's the reality that it is possible to tell this story and not ruin it. It's possible to do it, and it could be like even better. Like, oh, I appreciate it so much more. It's just Square has been very hit or miss lately.
Yes. Yeah.
And you take it seriously or not, because to be fair with Star Wars, it was still Lucas who came up with Anakin's backstory. Like, you don't have Sakaguchi behind Sephiroth here, which I'm pretty sure he had a very different philosophy on what kind of character Sephiroth should be compared to what modern Square-Enix thinks that should be done with him today. So it'll end up, at least with the fan base, being two completely different characters. Like, it's gonna be original Sephiroth and like Ever Crisis First Soldier Sephiroth.
Yeah.
Version.
We'll have to see. I'm kind of with you, Eric, where I'm interested to, like, I wasn't happy with the story changes that were made in the remake, a lot of them anyways, some of the bigger ones. But now that they've done it, I'm strangely curious how they're going to put all this together.
Yeah, they flipped the switch and now the train is going downhill, right? And you're just trying to see how they can.
It's kind of like when I was watching
what they can
Lost,
do. Yeah.
The show Lost, and they got to that point in the show where like the numbers appeared in like the grass, right? And the characters were looking at the numbers and they're like, what does this mean? I remember watching the show thinking this is going to be stupid, right? Like the resolution of this is going to be stupid. But I watched every episode because I just had to know. And this isn't exactly the same thing. I'm being, again, facetious here with this. I think this is much better than Lost, but I am interested in a similar spirit to how this is all going to stick together.
I don't know what's up with Nomura, man. Like, the ideas he come up with are so dumb. Like the stuff that he puts at the end of Kingdom Hearts 3. It's like, oh man, why did he put all this complex crap? Like, ooh, what's in the black box?
Yeah, that's it, dude. I need to know what's, guys. If you've not played Kingdom Hearts 3, that we're not spoiling anything, because I played the entirety of Kingdom Hearts 3, and I watched the entire ending, and I still was not spoiled because I don't know what happened. So you'll be okay. So, anyways,
like crap knowledge of everything beforehand to understand Kingdom Hearts 3.
But it was a very fun ride. Anyways, that's a complete tangent. Let's keep moving this. We can come back to this stuff for sure, but maybe some of these topics will tie into what we're talking about here loosely.
That's what you think in the comments.
Yeah.
Maybe we can get a conversation there.
All right. So Aerith's next topic, Aerith's motion capture actress. So this isn't the actress that voiced the character. This is the person doing the motion capture. So all the action scenes and walking around and stuff like that. She tweeted out that she said, I finished a 4-hour shoot with Sephiroth's motion actor yesterday. We finished the shoot in high spirits with praises from the staff and cast. I'll be working today too. And some of the fan reception to this was due to the length of the shoot, meaning it was 4 hours, and the fact that the actors were praised at the end of it. Some fans believe this is the infamous Aerith's death scene, because clearly if they were praised and it was a 4-hour scene and it was only Sephiroth and Aerith in the scene with nobody else, then it must be the scene where Sephiroth guts her like a fish. So
I think it was a 4-hour.
Yeah, I have my thoughts on this too, and I'm going to disagree.
It was a 4-hour session, right?
Correct.
Not just so we don't know.
That could have been reshoots. That could have been.
Yeah, and we don't know if it was just a single scene like that they were doing over and over for 4 hours to get the right take.
Right.
Oftentimes these actors have like schedules, right? They have other things they're working on.
Sure.
And so when they get them, and they get them in the motion capture, they're going to just film as many scenes as they can that they have them on set for that day, you know, because there's only so many times they can coordinate like Aerith and Sephiroth's actor, like performance actor, to be there at the same time.
Yeah.
You know, like those two characters. So most likely they filmed every scene they have in the game in that 4-hour session.
Well, people are pointing out, though, and I think this is a silly point, but I'll bring it up, is that in the original game, the only time it was only Aerith and Sephiroth on the screen was that moment when she died. And I think the obvious response to that is, well, they changed a lot of story in the part 1. So,
Yes.
and part 2, there's probably going to be scenes with Sephiroth and Aerith alone. But I think that you're on point, though, Stan, with what you're saying is, look, you know, they don't film these things in a linear fashion. They film them when they make sense. So they probably do all the action scenes that require like certain stunt people there and different stuff. And maybe they need like a martial artist or something. I don't know, but just someone there to kind of like give guidance. They're going to do all those scenes in one day. They're not going to send half the crew home for 3 months and then be like, okay, come back again for a half hour.
Yeah.
You know, it's going to be all done in one day. So that's part 1. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that the death scene was not filmed, because if the death scene is going to happen in part 2, Sephiroth has to be there. So people are taking like, oh, the death scene's going to be in this game, but at least in part 2. But I don't think we even know that. Like I said before, they're adding more stuff. So we don't know. Go ahead, Eric.
No, it could be that infamous scene, but something different still could happen. Like Eric, like, oh shit, well, you missed. I mean, there will be a scene like that
because she knows what's going to happen too. Yeah,
I would imagine though that scene, if they were going to do something different, that I feel like Cloud would have interfered in some fashion.
See, what I hope happens. I'm sorry. Did I interrupt you? Okay. So what if that moment in the game where you're trying to press X to keep Cloud from killing Aerith? What if Cloud actually does it? I think that would be way cooler. I think that would be way more powerful.
That would be more heartbreaking. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially, I don't know, even if they could incorporate the player somehow, like the player thought it was Sephiroth or something. But anyways, it's a slight tangent. But to get back to the point here of whether or not, you know, this is that scene or anything along that nature, there was an interesting point that I think is worth bringing up. Bear with me here for just 1 second, because I'm going to read some quotes from Nomura. But in the Ultimania, Nomura states, if we divide the story into large parts, it'll take longer to make. This is from the Ultimania for Final Fantasy VII Remake. So if we divide it into more detailed, smaller sections, then developing it will be faster. I hope to release the next one as soon as possible. And then in a Famitsu article in July 2020, Nomura stated, we would also like to deliver it as soon as possible, since we're also able to see the line of quality from the first installment. We hope to make the next installment even better in quality that can make for an even better experience. So the speculation is, and Nomura's said this in other interviews as well, that basically he wants to do smaller chunks. So not 40-hour games, but, you know, smaller chunks. So if they go that route, there's no way that
they wouldn't make it that far. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be, because we're talking maybe a 10-hour chunk, you know, and they could just put them out every year and a half. I hope they don't do that, but, you know, if that's the route that they want to go and he ends up going just to get part 2 out in a shorter fashion, then yeah, there's no way that.
Good Lord, I feel like it'll be a PS6 before you're like.
How long's it? Which one's easier, to play the original Final Fantasy VII or to play 80 episodes of Final Fantasy VII Remake, all 10 hours apiece?
Here's an argument a lot of people make, though, and I believe them, is that it is true that a good chunk of the game's dialogue is in Midgar.
Okay.
Yeah.
And a lot of what you are doing in the game afterwards, until things kick up, is you are on the trail to pursue Sephiroth. Now the question is, do you have to have every thing from the original game in there up to that point? Do you need to visit the Chocobo farm? Does the Midgar Zolom need to be a thing? Like, you can witness like the Midgar Zolom scene where you see a giant snake, or maybe let the Midgar Zolom be a boss, a mandatory boss, and you kill him, and then you go and you see the Midgar Zolom, another one, killed by Sephiroth. Like,
They'd have to,
so
yeah, they'd have to like if you fight and defeat the Zolom as a boss, then to get the same effect, you'd have to just like get to the cave and then just see like 12 Zoloms, right? Like all killed or something, you know, just so to get that same effect as the original game of like, oh, we're just like way in, we gotta watch out for this guy. Like
He killed
this
12
guy's
of
the
them.
real deal.
you can
Yeah.
make,
Well, you're in a party though. He's by himself, but still, yeah, that's not quite the same power scale. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really think you can make another 40-hour RPG out of leaving Midgar all the way up to the City of the Ancients.
Well, think about Wu Tai. I mean, they're talking about the war with Wu Tai. They've tied Avalanche to Wu Tai.
Mhm.
They didn't do a lot with Wu Tai in the original game. And that's supposed to be a nation that they have a long history with. So it would be really cool to experience that part of the world a little bit more. So I'm thinking of something like that. They could expand out. Junon would be easy because that's a huge city. So they could tell a whole nother story in there. You know, they have the Fort Condor sequence. They could make that more dramatic with a big battle. There's a lot of things that they could do, I think, to they have no problem padding the game out. We know that for sure. So, but the fact that Nomura said that because they already have the first one out, that's going to help them make the next game faster. That tells me that it's not going to be open world for part 2, right? So that's
especially if they continue with the same engine, right? The Unreal Engine.
What I'm getting at, because they already have that process worked out, that's going to help them with the next game, which implies they're not using a different engine for part 2, right?
Yeah, I don't think so.
It's going to be linear like the first game, and they'll just give you the option to backtrack the previous areas you've been to in some form. Rather, if they've created a narrative reason, you can go back, or they do like a let you go back to a previous chapter thing. With your stats and everything intact, you can jump between chapters, type of deal. If you're a completionist, I highly doubt a world map is coming.
Yeah,
probably not. It's kind of funny that you know, like when the remake was first announced and we were speculating like, oh, they're gonna try and turn Midgar into a 40-hour game. I don't know if there's enough content in there, right? But now we're speculating like, oh well, if they're trying to end the game at the City of the Ancients and they still want the game to be like 40 hours, well, maybe there's too much content and they have to cut some things. You know, it's like almost the exact opposite problem.
Well, I mean, I don't know, but like when you're running through grass fields, I mean, there's no sewers, there's no junkyards. Yeah. No, but they would replace that with forest mazes and everything else.
Here's the truth of the matter is, until you get to the City of the Ancients, there isn't a really good stopping point. Like the end of Midgar is like an obvious like end of chapter 1 type deal. It's like, what is like the big like end of chapter 2 type deal? And I think that's when you get to the City of the Ancients.
Well, yeah, because we just defeated a god. So they're going to have some epic boss fight at the end of this. And I think that the next part has to be, instead of an epic boss fight, I'm sure they'll still have some kind of boss fight like that, but it might be like a huge battle or something like that. Something that's epic in nature, kind of like the Two Towers, you know, for Lord of the Rings, where it's just something huge like that.
This is all, of course, assuming
tangent, but keep going.
Yeah, this is all, of course, assuming that they would even follow the same events like of the original game.
They've promised that they are going to, like the same beats.
Okay, well, if Katase is a man of his word, which
I would imagine the game is going to be the same in broad strokes.
Okay.
I think in some smaller details, you're probably going to change things.
Yeah, they're the only other places like Eric is mentioning. The best like bookend moment is kind of like the city of the ancients. You could maybe get away with ending it at the temple of the ancients when Cloud gives away the black materia to Sephiroth, and it kind of ends on like a not like a big bang, but kind of like a down moment. Like, oh, can we even trust Cloud anymore? Like, what's going on? You know, and then you're waiting, and they decide to pursue Aerith, and you got to wait for that to resolve, you know, in the next part. Or they could end it even earlier at Nibelheim and kind of bookend the game with the Nibelheim flashback and then end it when you reach Nibelheim. But that might be a little too short because then you wouldn't even get to Rocket Town and get to meet Sid and
that's not very climatic though, right? I mean,
I mean, unless they throw another Sephiroth battle there for no reason.
I guess
because you do catch up to him there.
I don't know. We'll have to see. But
you know
what's that?
He just always throw Genova in as a final boss in some.
Yeah, but Genova wasn't the final. Anyways,
previews or I was looking at leaked footage. Like I thought that like Genova fight in Remake was the final boss because it looked like it was.
So did I.
Not to be.
Yeah. I thought that was weird. I was like, we're not going to do the motorcycle thing. We're not going to. But they fooled us. So one thing of another slight tangent here, but one thing that was also brought up by Nomura, he was asked if Roche was going to be in part 2, and he said that it's very likely Roche will be in part 2. So if you all don't remember, he's the soldier first class, the other soldier first class that we run into in part 1. We lovingly call him Soldier Joe Dirt because he looks like Joe Dirt. And anyways, so I don't know if this excites me, it makes my engine roar, or if I'm just a little less enthused about that, but hopefully he's better executed in the next game.
The way he's introduced and marketed, like even before the game came out,
yeah,
made him a big deal, and then he gets defeated once and he's never heard from again. It's
very odd.
I'm okay with it.
Like, you can't just have that.
I'm okay with it. I don't know. I'm a weird ball though, because I did not mind with Final Fantasy 13 too, with them retconning 13, because I didn't like 13. So to me, it didn't bother me, right? So I'm in the same boat with this, that if they just didn't use Roche again, yeah, it's weird to not do that, but I think I'll live with it. Anyways, next piece of news here. I hesitate to call this a news, but Square-Enix, they tweeted out an image of a thought cloud. So like a thought cloud, like a cloud, like someone's thinking, right? But inside the thought cloud was a mini cloud. And that's all. There was no words or anything. And it's really weird because people are trying to figure out why would Square-Enix tweet that? You know, a company, like what's the point? Well, clearly there was a point, unless there's just a troll behind the keyboard. But the current theories are that there's 3 theories: that Final Fantasy VII Remake is coming to the Switch because inside the thought cloud was a very tiny cloud. And when I say cloud, I mean like a rain cloud. Not like the character cloud. It was like a rain cloud, a very small cloud. So people are thinking, okay, Final Fantasy VII Remake's coming to the Switch because then it would be Final Fantasy VII Remake on a mini console. Or Final Fantasy VII Remake's coming to Google Stadia via the cloud because it's cloud gaming. Or Final Fantasy VII Remake's coming to Game Pass because it's cloud gaming. I personally think all 3 of those are possibilities. I just don't think that those are necessarily related to that tweet because...
Is it a Japanese tweet?
No, it's English.
It's English. Okay, because they don't really do the cloud gaming thing for Switch over here in the West. They do in Japan, though. Capcom does with Resident Evil 7 in particular. They tested using cloud technology, which I guess works because they have like Wi-Fi everywhere there. I think they decided not to do it for the West, so I don't know if it's that. Being on Google Stadia is a definite possibility. They may have already like struck a deal with Google to put it on that platform.
Here's the problem, though. exclusivity for the 7 remake doesn't end until April. So May 1st will be the first date that they can even announce anything. And I find it strange that this is like somebody was like, you know what, we're going to put it on Google Stadia and we want to tweet this out in January. And people are going to speculate about it for 4 months. It seems weird. And I just like, I don't think that they tell the person holding the Square Enix account, like Twitter account, stuff like that, that could break their contract, because that person has a direct line to like 30,000 or however many thousands of people that are fans of Final Fantasy. So I think that, you know, what if that person decides to quit and they're like, oh, okay, Final Fantasy 17 is already in development. And then sends out, you know, they want to keep that from happening. And I tried to take a look at some more of Square Enix's Twitter account just to kind of see if there's any other references. And there's some weird stuff on that Twitter account. I don't know who's operating it, but there's currently this very weird thing going on with this person who has the Twitter handle of Yorha, Yorha, from Nier Automata. And what happens is this person will tweet out things to Square Enix, like, can I come out to play? And Square Enix will respond, no, not today, or go to your room. They've been doing this for like months. And so I'm trying to figure out, you know, why Square Enix is engaging with this person that they don't even know, you know, but it's kind of silly, but I suspect that 7 Remake is probably going to come to Xbox. It's probably going to come to Stadia. It could even come to Switch, but I suspect that this tweet has no connection to that.
Now, can I, now to bring up something interesting here is Square Enix in the past attempted to do cloud gaming. And do you know what it was called? It was called Shenra. If I recall correctly, it was called Shenra Electric Power Company, wasn't it? Their cloud service.
Oh, so maybe it's related to that trademark, Shenra Electric Power Company.
They might be trying to revive it, maybe?
I didn't know this. Okay, so walk me through this here. So they had cloud gaming, and what was on this? Like, this was... Wait, was this the thing where you could play Final Fantasy games, but you had to pay like a monthly fee?
It was like a thing where you could play like Final Fantasy 13 on your tablet and like use their cloud service to stream it.
And it was called Shenra Electric Power Company.
I'm looking up right now to confirm that before people in the comments are like, God, he doesn't even know what he's doing. He doesn't even do his research. I'm doing it right now. Square Enix.
Well, regardless, I guess, because I didn't even look into deeply whether or not Square was doing cloud gaming. I just figured that it was probably on their radar like it is most gaming companies, because I just Googled it, and one article came up from November 2013, Square Enix banks on the future of cloud gaming with Project Flare.
Oh, okay. So it was called Shenra Technologies. This was back in 2014.
A maniacal maniac. Let's name it after that. Yeah. So either way, the fact that they have their hand in this, the fact that they're looking into cloud gaming, I think that's normal. Most companies are looking into cloud gaming. That's probably the future. They'd be fools not to. They're probably doing that now with Stadia. They have Final Fantasy 15 on Stadia, which is cloud gaming. So that's all there. They have history with it. I just don't think this tweet is in reference to any of that. So
now, this was back in 2014 when cloud gaming was like not in an ideal state. So
yeah, I'm not denying that they're working on cloud gaming. I just don't think this tweet means that.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's up in the air. It could very well be Stadia. It could be. It could even be something as dumb as you can cloud save your PS4 Final Fantasy VII Remake data to the PS5 version. Like,
or it could just be this person that's tweeting to the character Yorha, the go to your room. That person just is not very well managed, and they just tweeted that out. You know, I don't know. I just think that any kind of any speculation on that, I think, is just grasping at straws. I guess that's my view. But
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, it's such a vague picture that it really could be anything.
yeah. The last thing here is there was an apparent leak from a credible source that said that there's going to be a PlayStation 5 version of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and it's going to be announced this year and coming out this year. And I already expected the game to come out on the PlayStation 5, like a PlayStation 5 version. So that didn't come as news to me. I guess it's news that it would happen this year. But what do you guys think about that?
It was inevitable, I think, especially since the second part will obviously be jumping to, at the very least, PS4, PS5 hybrid type scenario where they'll probably sell copies for both. And really, I think it's going to be a free upgrade. I don't think they're going to add anything new, especially since they're focusing on the second part. I think it's to be part of the crowd because a lot of companies, Capcom, Ubisoft, everyone are doing free PS5 upgrades. And I think it depends if there's significant amount of new content in a PS5 version, then maybe. But if it's just like better load performances or better frame rate,
well, you already get that with backwards compatibility right now. So
yeah, but like but even then, it, like they optimize it for the PS5.
Sure.
Instead of just no, if they put like new content in that increases the life or like adds like maybe 20 hours to the game. God, I hope not. But adds like 20 more hours to the game. I guess you can justify it, but if they're doing just an optimization patch, I think they're just gonna just be like, hey, if you got the PS4 version, you can upgrade to the PS5 for free.
I don't know. I mean, I think that obviously if they're going to sell a PS5 version separately, they're not going to just have the backwards compatibility of the PlayStation 4 version, you know, and there's obvious visual upgrades to it. It runs at a higher resolution, but the textures themselves are more detailed. And like you said, the load times are really drawn down dramatically. I could see Square charging for that. I mean, Square just charged for 3 separate versions of Dragon Quest XI. I don't think that they're going to shy away from doing that with the 7 remake.
Well, like I said, it depends on
the amount of content. Yeah, sure.
You added like essentially a whole
but
different
anyways,
of the game.
We've had this conversation before. But
yeah. So whether you agree with it or not, there is some justification to rebuying the game.
Sure.
If all they do is like some touch-ups to the game, I think it would be silly to try to convince people to buy a PS5 version of the game when the PS4 version already came out.
Yeah.
I think they might do like releasing the game on PS5 or like offer a PS5 version of the game, but they'll offer you the PS5 upgrades if you insert your PS4 disc.
Sure.
Yeah, because if they added new content, but it was a completely free update, there's nothing to stop somebody from buying a PlayStation 4 copy, like physical copy that they can get
for $5
used, right, cheap for $10 to $20, and then just put it in there and be like, oh, cool, now I have the PS5 version. You know, I don't think Square would be very happy with that.
CD Projekt Red has said they're going to do that with Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk, right?
They have, and they are like a much more consumer-friendly
despite
company.
This recent controversy.
Previous to like what just happened. Yeah.
Like I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if Square-Enix charged for it.
So I think that Square received a lot of variety of different types of criticism for the way they treated Final Fantasy 15 with all the different, DLC options, and some of it was free, some of it wasn't. The one that wasn't free, people were unhappy with the price. So I think that they are going to charge for it, but I think they're going to do like you're saying, Eric, they're going to incorporate it in the PS5 version, and they're just going to add in that whatever DLC they had originally planned is going to be just in the PS5 version. And that will be their excuse to have you pay full price.
Yeah.
Like Dragon
That's
Quest
probably
XI. Yeah.
It's probably a pretty strong possibility that that's what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And I would assume that this would also be the next gen console version would be a multi-console, cross-console. Like it would be on Xbox Series X as well,
Sure.
because the console exclusivity was for 1 year,
Mhm.
right, to PlayStation 4. Once it's no longer exclusive to PlayStation 4, it can come to PC and to Xbox as well. So
if they are going to do DLC in Midgar, what are we thinking though? I'm thinking it's going to center around some of the Avalanche characters.
I think you could have a Tifa episode that's like her trying to track
Backstory?
down Cloud. No, like just the period where Cloud meets Aerith and he's in Sector 7. You can have the whole part that Tifa basically
Yeah, that would be
informs
a
you
good
about
one.
anyway, where she catches on to Don Corneo, like having the knowledge of the plate drop, and then she gets her like dress and then goes to the wall market scenario, and that can be a chapter on its own.
See, I think that they introduced too much with Jessie and they didn't do anything with it. With the fact that her father had this, basically because the planet was being sucked dry, she felt that his spirit wasn't able to move on. Right.
Mhm.
And I felt that there was a lot that wasn't done with that character and that character arc. And I felt that they could do something with that. And Jessie's so popular anyways. I could see them doing something along that lines. But at the same time, Jessie's not going to, well, I don't know. Maybe she is because they have that alternate timeline, but she's not going to be in the games in the future. So maybe they don't want to highlight her too much. I don't know. It could go as a, hey, last opportunity to play more of her. What's that?
Let's not kid ourselves. All three of them are coming back.
Yeah.
Jessie was way too popular of a character, a highly praised character in that game for them to just simply kill her off.
But I have, anyways, it's just so weird to bring her back because all the time stuff was broken, right? So that's why, Barrett was brought back to life. That's why, because they stopped all this interference, but they just didn't stop the interference that kept them alive. But all the other stuff went back to normal. It's just weird. So
yeah.
So definitely probably PS5 version coming this year. That'd be cool. I think we're in agreement with that.
It's pretty much I'd be shocked if it didn't make it this year and it was pushed to 2022 or something like that. They had that 1 year console exclusivity for a reason, right? I assume they're chomping at the bit to release the game again in some other form.
If it gets pushed, the only reason I could see it being pushed is if maybe they want to line it up with part 2 in some fashion.
Yeah, I suppose that could be.
But besides that, you're right. It's I think it's way too easy of an upgrade to.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I agree. So I think that's going to wrap us up for this week. Do you guys got anything else you want to talk about with the 7 remake in particular, with what we've talked about? Anything left over you forgot to mention?
Don't think so. Of course, everybody can add their own speculation in the comments,
Yeah, definitely do that. I actually will chat with you on our 7 remake review episodes. There's a couple people I had some very good conversations with, and on Discord, and also the comment section, where they were like, hey, you brought out this point, but this is what I think. And we had that constructive conversation, which I really appreciated, and got a greater sense of where people were coming from with what they thought about some of the plot changes. So definitely enjoy that type of conversation.
That's the beautiful thing about these Nomura games is no matter how many theories we make and no matter how much sense they make, we're all wrong at the
Somehow
end.
They'll all be wrong.
Nomura will just do something we just never expect.
Yeah, that is what it is. Forgot to mention earlier, but please go check out our media partner, rpgfan.com. They have just news articles constantly, game reviews going back all the way to the late 90s. They have a YouTube page. They just did a review for Cyberpunk and, full video review and written reviews. They have other podcasts, Retro Encounter, which does more like book club style podcasts, and then Random Encounter, which me and Eric were just on an episode part 2 of their Game of the Year, RPG of the Year discussion. And I don't know when part 2 is coming out, but I thought it was a pretty good podcast episode. Don't you think, Eric?
I could have used a little less of me, yeah, but yeah.
Yeah, after we got done, they actually asked, for Eric not to come back,
Yeah, specifically told me, don't ever come back.
But if you want to see Eric just, blazing his way out on the podcast, you can. I'm just kidding. They loved Eric, so definitely check out Random Encounter in particular. We should be coming out on an episode soon with that. And with that, we will see you all next week. Take it easy, guys.
Take care.
See you next time.